Good morning, I'm John Ellsworth, founder of Success Strategies Incorporated and the creator of the Success Strategies Advantage, and I want to welcome you to today's presentation, which I've entitled with a question. Do you know who I am? And no, I am not Darth Vader, although that was the question that he asked, do you know who I am? But I think let's recognize that as a great question that every one of us should ask of ourselves. I want to point out that Matthew McConaughey, excellent actor, I love his movies. He did a speech that it's entitled The Speech That Broke the Internet. You can find it online. I highly recommend you listen to it. But he explains the following, and he says, and I quote, "Knowing who we are often begins with first recognizing who we are not," end of quote. So again, I highly recommend you look that up on the internet. It's maybe 15 minutes long. It's a fabulous speech though. But I want to pursue what he's saying, what he's talking about here. So let me give you a couple examples. Several years ago, I had a dairyman who was of really long-term success, very successful. He had no one to take over his operation. He had children, he had 2 children, and they were very successful people. 2 sons, the one was a doctor, did surgeries, a very successful individual, and his other son was a CPA, a very successful accountant. But this gentleman represented the 3rd generation of the family operation and had done extremely well. He'd done very well for himself and for his family, but he felt somewhat ashamed. Now you may think of that like I did and go, why are you ashamed? This is exciting. This is cool. You've done such a great job, but why? Well, it turns out what was bothering him is that he was looking for that 4th generation, and the 4th generation was not taking over the operation. So we had extensive discussions, really long discussions, and I want to say that I had to point out several things. Number 1, how well he had done. Number 2, how successful his sons had been. And that wasn't just a fluke. They were successful because he had set a good example for them. They had gotten great educations, which he financed. He paid for those. And he operated this as the 3rd generation of this dairy operation through some very difficult times. 2000, 2002, 2003, 2006, 2009, do you remember how devastating that was? But the point is, he needed to recognize himself as a success. But to do that, as Matthew McConaughey so accurately points out, he needed to recognize what he was not. And what was that? What he was not was someone that would live forever. And he just had to face that because none of us do. And so the key was to see himself as more of a success. He had to recognize what he was not instead of beating himself up about what he was missing out on, in this case, the 4th generation of his operation. Another example for you, had a dairy client who his banker pushed him to diversify. Oh, you're agonizing through these tough times for the dairy industry, so you should consider diversifying. You should consider growing almonds. And not belittling that because it's been a great industry. But the diversification sounded like a real plus, doesn't it? Oh, diversify, lower your risk overall, that type of thing. And almonds were bringing $3 per pound. It was fabulous. What could possibly go wrong? Well, over the next 5 years of developing these orchards that he diversified into, he continued the dairy operation, but he was diversifying into 2 segments of agriculture. The development cost basically doubled, went from $6,000 per acre to $12,000 per acre. Operating costs skyrocketed, and all I can say with both of those factors is we're lucky we didn't have any inflation, supposedly, back in those days. But fuel and fertilizer went through the roof. Almond prices dropped significantly to as low as $1.50, but more in the $1.80 per pound range. And interest rates, and many of you already know this, have increased over the last 18 months by 5% or more. So the factors he was dealing with, increased stress, Was he diversified? Yes, of course he was. But he was simply tired of the worry. And what he realized, um, to identify accurately who he really was, he needed to recognize who he was not. And he was not someone who could deal really well with high debt levels and the stress of low margins that might go along with that. In this case, it was like the perfect storm, but he needed to recognize what he couldn't deal with, who he was not, to recognize who he was. So he went on and he had already diversified. He divested part of this operation, the almond operation, and got himself back on track financially. So I want to ask you one question in closing. What do you need to consider as you recognize who you are by first identifying who you are not? Again, what do you need to consider as you recognize who you are by first of all identifying who you are not? If I can assist you with that process, I would be happy to do that. You can go to our website. You can email me at john@success-strategies.com. I would be more than happy to speak with you and visit with you about how we could remedy that situation for you. Again, I'm John Ellsworth, founder of Success Strategies Incorporated and the creator of the Success Strategies Advantage, and I want to thank you for listening today. Thank you very much.